Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Dissidents and Dictators. I'm Elisha Maldonado, here with my very favorite, Casey Michelle.
That's me.
On today's episode, we'll be talking with Victoire Ingabire, a Rwandan opposition leader who's not only barred from running in the country's July presidential elections, but is also being prevented from leaving the country. We'll find out why. She's also joined by Kate Gibson, part of her international legal team, to discuss the case they filed at the East African Court of Justice, seeking the rehabilitation of her civil and political rights. All that and more coming up. Stay tuned. Victoire, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. Yeah.
Victoire, I wanted to ask first and foremost, where are you joining us from? You're not in studio today. Again, we are honored to be speaking with you. Where are you calling in from?
Thank you for having me. I live in Kigali, and I follow sometimes the broadcast you make. It is really an honor for me to be with you today.
Lovely. I'd like to go back to we'd like to canvass your history a little bit, but can you go back to, before we get to present day, go to your arrest and imprisonment and what that was for and how that brings us to what's going on today?
Okay, thank you. I am a married woman. I have 3 children and I have 4 grandchildren. I live in Rwanda, in Kigali, and my husband and my kids are in Europe. In 14 years, I have not seen them, my family, my husband, my kids, my grandchildren, because the Rwanda government does not allow me to visit my family because I criticize the policy of government and because I wanted to run as president in Rwanda. And the reason I cannot visit my family is that when I came in Rwanda, it was in January 2010, and a few months later, I was arrested. But my goal when I come back in Rwanda was to participate in the construction in our country. Mm-hmm. And I was arrested a few months later, and I was condemned for 15 years. And I spent 8 years in prison, out to which 5 I was held in solitary confinement. And I was condemned only because I made a speech. When I come back the first day, I visited the memorial genocide at Gibson, when I said that to achieve the effective reconciliation among Rwandans, we need to recognize all victims. Because if you know the history of Rwanda, we had the genocide against the Tutsis in 1994. But before and during and after the genocide, there was also crime against humanity committed against the Hutus. And I say to achieve the reconciliation, we need really to recognize our victims and to remember our victims. Mm-hmm. The next day, I was attacked by government media that I preach the theory of double genocide. I say I make difference between both crimes, but I was condemned for minimizing genocide. When I was condemned, it was in 2012, but I made an appeal to the Africa Court on Human and People Rights. And there's a court declared that Rwanda government violated my right to freedom of expression, and they asked the Rwanda government to pay reparation. But until today, Rwanda government refused to recognize the decision of the court. This is why the last month I introduced application to the High Court in Rwanda to ask it to be rehabilitated, because according to the Rwanda law, if you are condemned more than 6 months, you cannot participate in elections for the president of parliament. So when I introduced my application, I hoped to be rehabilitated because according to the law, I spent 5 years after my release, but the High Court dismissed my application on the basis of the presidential pardon. So this I today it means that I can't participate in the election that we will have in Rwanda in July.
So I was going to say, Victoire, again, I think it's worth pulling back. This for you, this journey goes all the way back at least to 2010. We're talking about 14 years ago at this point. And I know we'll spend more of the conversation talking about Kagame, his government, his authoritarianism, his supporters abroad, including in the democratic world itself. And I do think a lot of folks, certainly in democracies in places like Europe or North America, are increasingly realizing, especially with the 30th anniversary right now of the genocide, of the crimes of the Kagame regime itself, especially in the last few years. But you're talking about back in 2010 when you voluntarily returned to Rwanda just to stand for election, and the regime immediately clamped down on you, silenced your voice, put you in prison, 5 years of solitary confinement. I can't imagine 1 day of solitary confinement. And yet you are still fighting, you are still pushing forward. So I interrupted your story, but here we are in 2024. What is the status of your fight for justice in Kigali, in Rwanda?
Yeah, my fight is I am still in this library, even if the government do everything to prevent me to make a good realization in our policy. And for example, today, if you see all members of my political party, 8 members are in prison, and I have 3 members who are assassinated, and I have also 4 members who are disappeared. So this is the kind of the price we pay in our struggle to achieve the democracy, to achieve the justice, to establish the rule of law in our country. And as I told you, since 2010, when I come back in Rwanda, until today, I did not visit my family, my husband, my kids, because when I was released, the President Kagame released me gave me the pardon in 2018 with condition. One of the conditions that I can't leave the country without authorization of the Minister of Justice. More than 5 times in 5 years, I asked the authorization to visit my family, but until today, the government ignored my request. And once a month, I have to visit to go to the prosecutor. That means if I am no more in the prison, inside the prison, but I can say that I am still in prison because I don't have right to move as I wanted to do.
I was going to, Victoire, why do you think, I mean, what's so fascinating about this, and certainly so many of the guests that we have spoken with on the podcast in the past, standing up to dictators, standing up to autocrats, organizing against those regimes, very often those regimes, those dictators, are happy to see those democratic figures leave the country, go into exile. They can continue their work from elsewhere, but no longer be in that country itself. And yet, as you just mentioned, the Kagame regime is doing everything they can to keep you in Kigali, keep you in this kind of, I guess, open-air prison. Why do you think that is? Why do you think they've gone to such lengths to keep you in Rwanda?
Stole the question right out of my mouth.
I don't know, because now, maybe before the COVID, I thought maybe they don't want that I be in touch with international media, with the different governments. But today, with the technology, I am speaking to you via Zoom or via other communication tools. So I don't know why they want absolute to keep me inside. Or maybe it is only to hurt me, because that hurt me, because I can't see my husband. My husband is sick since 2016. So it is only to hurt me. I don't see other reason why they don't want me to leave the country. And I don't want to stay outside, because I say always, when I come back, it was voluntary. I decided to leave exile and to come to live in my country. And what I want is only to visit my family, my husband, who is sick, who cannot make a long travel in Africa, and only to visit him and come back. So I don't want to stay outside, but I don't understand why until today the government refused to give me the authorization to visit my family.
When you returned, you were running for office at that time as well, correct?
Yes. When I come back, my goal was to register my political party and then to participate in the presidential election.
And what was your platform?
A few months later, I was arrested.
And what was your platform what was your platform when you were coming back? What was the messaging that you were hoping to change by running for office at that time?
When I come back, my message first, as I said, was reconciliation, needed to build reconciliation, effective reconciliation, where we harmonize the history of our countries or the darker history of our countries. Secondary was to build the development for all. And until today, people talk about the achievement, the miracle in Rwanda. I agree that there's some achievement, but we have a long way to go. Because if people talk about the achievement, the economic achievement, it is only in Kigali, because in Kigali we have beautiful building, we have the cleanest street. It is known in all Africa that we have the cleanest street. But the development is about people. The majority of Rwanda people live in the abject poverty in rural areas. So the development should not only be in Kigali, where the tourists stay, but it should be in all other countries, other country.
We have another presidential election coming up in July, correct?
Yes.
Are you expecting any decisions, any developments between now and that election itself? I ask because clearly you have a platform, clearly you have a campaign to run on, and I have no doubt that the Kagame regime not only sees you as a critic, but as a potential successful opponent, which is why they're going to such lengths to silence you. I'm wondering if you see any potential shift, any opening between now and the election, or are you expecting these decisions to continue as they have, for the regime to continue silencing you, keeping you in, again, effectively an open-air prison?
No, they will not open a political space. My concern today is that the ruling party's goal is to keep grip on power by using every variable means, including laws and the judiciary, to disable its opponents. As I say, I was in the prison, and the other members of opposition, for example, Maitre Bernard Ntaganda is the leader of Parti Socialiste, was also arrested. In 2017, Mrs. Diana Rwigara tried to participate. She was also arrested. So we don't know what will be happening. We will be arrested this year. I am still at my home. I am not yet arrested, but I don't know if until July, I will be free, but nothing will change. Nothing will change.
Okay, can you talk to us briefly about what it's like dealing with the legal system there? What kind of, flavor that has of difficulty? How
does it not feel like you're just banging your head against the wall day in, day out when you have to go up against the Rwandan court system?
Well, I think precisely for that reason, being that it's sort of universally recognized that the Rwandan judiciary isn't independent from the executive. We see reports from the US State Department saying the Rwandan judiciary is used as a tool to silence political opponents. And in any politically sensitive cases, even to the US State Department, the outcomes appear predetermined. And so I think that's why we've made this decision to try and go outside the Rwandan judicial system and file a claim in front of this regional court, the East African Court of Justice, that exists in a neighbouring state that the Rwanda is a state party to. And as a state party, Rwanda has signed a treaty saying that it agrees to uphold these sort of fundamental values of democracy and rule of law and good governance. And we're saying in our complaint that by depriving Victoire of her rehabilitation, which she is entitled to under Rwandan law, by having done that, Rwanda is violating its obligations as a treaty party to the East Africa community. So instead of banging our head against that same wall, we've gone outside to see if we can have some measure of success with a regional court.
Kate, do you think the regime, maybe Kagame himself, obviously he's been in power for, almost a quarter century at this point, do you think they were surprised by that decision? And I hesitate to ask, I don't want you to put yourself in their shoes. It's a very dark and scary place to be. But do you think they were expecting this move from you, or do you think they were actually taken a little bit aback by this, certainly as far as I can tell, very original decision to simply circumvent the regime itself?
I would hate to try and predict what goes on in the heads of the people in power in Kigali. But I think the Rwandan government is seeing more and more that this grip on power, and as you say, President Kagame has been in power. He's been president for over a quarter of a century, and he's changed the constitution to allow himself to do that. And if he wins the next election, he's then allowed to run again. He's allowed to be in power for 34 years in total. And in that time, I think he's seen that there are these different legal avenues that lawyers are able to explore in order to try and push democratic change from happening in Rwanda. You know, when we saw in 2020, when the Rwandan government kidnapped, for example, dissident Paul Kagame, who was living in the US, there were a lot of legal channels that were opened up through the United Nations, through the East African Court, through different legal complaints in Belgium and the US that really tried to put pressure on the Rwandan government. So I think it's probably not surprising that these efforts are being made, but I think it's probably equally frustrating.
Well, we're going to have Paul on the podcast in a few weeks' time for a live episode of the Oslo Freedom Forum, just to plug that episode for folks to listen for in a few weeks. Kate, I'm wondering, maybe bringing things over to Kagame for a second. You know, there was an article in Bloomberg just a few weeks, maybe a few months ago at this point, that described Kagame as the West's favorite autocrat. And again, the kind of broader democratic world. You know, this is a regime that certainly other scholars, other researchers have looked at, have focused on in terms of its image management, its image and reputation laundering, wherein Kagame is not associated with some of the other horrific, bloodied, kleptocratic dictatorships, not only globally, but even in the region itself. One of the most successful efforts at laundering the reputation of a sitting autocrat. I'm wondering, Kate and Victoire, I'm wondering in your recent conversations with others, Victoire, as your case proceeds and hopefully gets more and more attention along the way, has that image of Kagame as this kind of benign reformer, maybe he's not necessarily the most democratic figure, has that image changed at all, or is that pretty set in terms of the folks that you've been working with and conversations you've been having?
You know, first what I want to say is that I don't understand why the international community demands the neighbors country of Rwanda to organize democratic election and yet endorse the election that are clearly unrealistic in Rwanda. And we have the election in July, and until today, I have not yet heard any countries, one of the donor countries like America, UK, or European Union, to ask Rwanda to organize free and fair election in Rwanda and the inclusive elections. Rwandans, they have to understand that Rwandans deserve to see a peaceful and a transparent transfer of power, like in a neighbors country, like Burundi, Tanzania, and DRC. And I think if we will have democracy regime in Rwanda, we can also have stability in the Great Lakes region.
So what's next for you and then this, kind of attempt to get the courts to see the right way of things? Looking forward to the next 2 months.
I am waiting to see first what will be the decision of the East African Court. If the decision will be positive, even if the time is short, but I am sure that I can, in short time, win the election if the East African Court allow me to participate in the election. That I am sure. But if the decision is not in my favor, then I will go ahead in my struggle until I recover my right, until we establish a democratic system in our country, until we have a rule of law in our country.
And at that point, when you win the election and other states recognize that, they will finally finally do what they're doing right now in terms of supporting democracy, or sorry, what they say they're doing right now.
Right.
They will finally actually be supporting these kinds of democratic reforms in Rwanda itself. Kate, what are you expecting moving forward? Is there a timeline we should be looking at? Should we expect a decision by the end of summer, by the end of the year? Where are things and what should we be anticipating?
Well, as you said, the presidential elections in which Victoire is seeking to run as a candidate are happening in July. There's a hard deadline for registering as a presidential candidate, which is the end of this month. It's the end of May. So we've said to the East African Court, you need to move fast. And the court has the ability to put in place interim measures quickly. And that's what we've asked them to do. So this is a legitimate complaint, which is actively seeking to have Victoire on this ballot in July. If that doesn't happen, then I think one of the things that's so striking about Victoire is that she is unwavering in her commitment to being part of the Rwandan democratic landscape. You know, everything I know about her and have seen her do makes me think that this will just be another obstacle that she knows she has to step over in order to continue to her struggle to get what she wants, which is really to be a voice for other Rwandans who aren't currently being represented in the Rwandan political sphere. So what happens next will be anyone's guess, but I imagine it will be just a continuation and perseverance along these same lines. And hopefully, as much as we can, using the law and the assistance of the international community to try and open up this democratic and civic space that has been so closed for so long in Rwanda.
I was going to say, Kate, to that point, and I know we talked about Paul's case a moment ago in terms of using other jurisdictions and other legal structures and legal tools. Are there other examples that you and your legal team representing Victoire have looked to, maybe outside of Rwanda, that is to say non-Rwandan, democratic activists or anti-regime opponents, successes there? Are there other cases that you have studied that are worth, certainly for the listeners, maybe familiarizing ourselves with, or that can provide a kind of model for you and your team moving forward?
I mean, the Rwandan landscape is fairly unique in terms of the way in which I think the judiciary within Rwanda is so actively weaponized against political opponents. So we see, as Victoire was saying, anyone who puts their hand up as a candidate is likely to be imprisoned, is certainly going to be silenced and is likely to be charged with criminal offenses. So in that context, we see that there are other mechanisms outside of Rwanda that we need to be engaging with. For example, when Victoire was convicted in 2012, the European Parliament passed a resolution saying we're really concerned about this. We think this is political targeting through the judicial system. We know that there are many special procedures that are open to us through the United Nations, special rapporteurs and working groups where we can go and try and draw Victoire's case to their attention. And even though these are all sort of incremental steps, we know that these sorts of international statements start to make the friends of Rwanda and the partners of Rwanda even more and more uncomfortable with what they see as being a real clampdown on any kind of dissent or democratic voices in the state. So I think we'll need to just slowly keep chipping away and continuing to shine a light on Victoire and her story in order to make sure that she still has a chance to join this democratic space in Rwanda.
Absolutely.
Victoire, I was hoping you would give us a message to your fellow Rwandans. Let's say that your rights are restored and you're able to run freely and fairly in this election. Is there a message that you'd like to give to your fellow people?
The message that I would like to give to the people, first, I would like to call the friends and the all wishers to help Rwanda get out of the cycle of political violence that the system by impressing on the Rwandan regime to end political exclusion of political parties that present alternative political program to the ruling party program. And for Rwandans, I ask them not to be afraid to stand up for your right, because the majority of Rwandans live in the fear to be hurt, to be assassinated, to be kidnapped, even if they are outside the Rwanda. So I asked them really not to be afraid of the Rwanda government, but to stand up as one voice, one nation, to build a stability and a united nation.
Well, this is the great irony, I think, of all of this. If Paul Kagame was confident in his leadership, in his legacy, in his government himself, and okay, fine, maybe he has another term available to him legally speaking, but if he was confident in his leadership, why would he be trying to silence, trying to eliminate those voices that are opposed to him and those other potential candidates? I mean, this is, again, we see this in dictatorship after dictatorship. They are afraid of their opponents. They are afraid of what the people might say, who they might vote for, and who they might vote out in this case. And again, even though Kagame himself has so many friends and so many supporters in the democratic world, which is an absolute stain on those democratic politicians and democratic legislators elsewhere, including right here in the United States of America. Again, my sense is from the outside looking in, whether it's Victoire's story, whether it's Paul's story, it seems like these are early days, yet things may be beginning to shift in terms of the impression, the understanding. And of course, we do a lot of this work here at Human Rights Foundation itself. The impression of Kagame as this, again, kind of benign reformer is maybe finally giving way to a reality that he is just another autocrat. He is just another dictator who will use all of these same tools and techniques to silence his opponents, which again, Kate, gets back to your work, finding these new tools that other reformers, other opponents can look to, can use as we continue to hope for success in Victoire's case, certainly in Paul's case itself. Other democratic reformers can use in their own countries against their own autocrats moving forward. That wasn't really a question. That was just me on my soapbox right there. But Kate and Victoire, please feel free to respond.
It was very good. It sounded good.
No, you are right. Because sometimes if they say Kagame is popular among Rwandans, and they say if he is so popular among Rwandans, why is he afraid to be in a competition with the other candidates, with the competent figures of opposition? So that's the question I ask every time is they say the fanatic of the regime say Kagame is popular or people like him. There are also some foreigners who come in Rwanda. I remember the last time 2 or 3 months ago, I read a Twitter right by imams from someone from Israel who say, I am in Rwanda, I did not see any people who support Victoire. If there's someone, he has to come to see me, and but nobody supports Victoire, only genocide. I say that is the narrative of Rwanda government, but I have supporters. And I responded to him, before you ask them, ask the government to let you meet the member from my political party who are in prison today, who spent 2 years without judgment. Ask the government, where is my assistant who were kidnapped in June 2020? Ask them who assassinated my assistant, who assassinated the coordinator of my political party, before you say that I don't have any support in Rwanda. So I have a support in Rwanda. So I am confident that if the regime of Kagame let me participate in the election, I will win easily.
You have support.
Because people, they need change. There is something that people should understand. Today, the majority of Rwanda people, they are youth who are more, I think they are minor during the genocide, or they are born after the genocide. So they are now the majority of Rwandans. They need other style of governance than the style of governance that we have today in Rwanda, where they don't have no room to express their mind. They need other style of governance. That is why they need the change. That is why the government of Kagame has no right to prevent them to have the chance to choose the other policy of their opposition political parties.
Well, Victoire, you have support in Rwanda, and you certainly have support here in New York City as well.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
not only for everything you do, obviously, but for joining us today. Kate, thank you as well. Elisha, any final words from you?
Just wish you luck and hope the courts decide that they'd like to be on the right side of history.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thanks
A
both.
pleasure. The Human Rights Foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes and protects human rights globally with a focus on closed societies. We promote freedom where it's most at risk, in countries ruled by authoritarian regimes.